Hi, everybody. Um, I did my article critique on a article called "The Relationship of Falls and Fears of Falling to Activity Limitations and Physical Inactivity in Parkinson's Disease." That title kind of tells you the wording of the article. It was just like tons of jargon and not layman's terms, but I was interested in it because my father has had Parkinson's for about 19 years and he has fallen a few times, and I thought this would be an interesting article to review. This is the second time I've done an article review for this degree, and unfortunately this one's kind of in the same boat as the first one, where I don't feel like they did a very good job. I feel like the time was spent on nothing. But let's get into it. And I do apologize that this isn't a narrated PowerPoint presentation. As some of you know, I just moved my dad, my mom, and my dog from Big Bear, California to Palm Springs, California. And we're still living out of boxes, and I have no idea where my headset is to do the microphone part. And honestly, I just wasn't gonna go buy one when I know I'd probably pull it out of a box next week. So, I'm glad that the teacher has us answer these specific questions about these articles, because it's one thing to read the article and you're thinking, okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable, and then you start doing the deep dive on who these people are and what their background is, and you're like, oh wait a minute. So there are 4 authors on this article, and the main guy is named Mon Bryant, and he's written 10 articles, and all the articles that he's written focus on gait and walking as it relates to Parkinson's disease. He is the adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Baylor College in Texas, and so he's obviously, part of kinetics and movement, so that makes sense. And then the next gal is Diana Rintala. She's a professor emeritus who's also from Baylor. Then we have, I'm sorry if I'm killing his name, Jai Gong Ho is a medical doctor in Texas, and he has a focus on neurology. And Elizabeth Protas is the vice president and dean at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. And although Mr. Bryant has written these 10 articles, 9 of them appear to be duplications of this exact same article. Looks like he just rewrote it with different names. It all basically is about the same thing. The article that I did my review on was the one he was most cited for, and he was only cited 34 times. So again, I'm picking the article based on interest, and I don't do these deep dives until after I've picked the article. Otherwise, I'd be like, oh, why did I pick this article? Because we can probably guess the level of this study. It's only been cited 35 times. And the other 3 authors, use that term loosely, have never been cited, have never written anything. They've done nothing. It looks like the main author, Bryant, it basically was a one-man show, and he put these 3 other people's names on this article to lend credibility. But once you do these deep dives, if you were just to look at the article, you say, oh, these look like important people. And then you research the people and you're like, oh, wait, they've never written anything about anything before. And now suddenly they've written this research paper on gaits and falling and Parkinson's. So that was a little disappointing and shocking. This study was published in the Journal of Aging and Physical Activity in 2015. It appears to be a journal that's primarily focused on kinetics or movement. Many of the points in the article are repeated over and over and over again, as if the authors were trying to meet some sort of minimum word quota. And now I see, maybe as he's written all these other articles that appear to be the same, maybe he's just merging them together and not reading them from beginning to end. But he repeats himself a lot, and I guess I'm saying he, but they repeat themselves a lot. The authors state that they have reviewed other studies, but they don't really go into detail. And they also claim that this study that they did has never been studied before. Okay, I'm pretty sure if this has never been studied before, it'd been cited a lot more than 35 times. but they say it's never been studied before. They do say that the fear of falling in Parkinson's patients has been widely studied, but they wanted to study specifically how the fear of falling affected people's activities, daily living, ADLs, and their general activity level. In their citations, they listed at least 50 other articles written on how Parkinson's is intertwined with the fear of falling. But they don't cite that many in their article. They probably only cite a handful. I'm not really sure how this study expanded on this already extensive area of study on the subject. The purpose of their study was to assess the extent of activity limitations in individuals with Parkinson's who experienced falls, and then to identify factors that associated the activity with the limitation. So basically they're saying, does someone who has a fear of falling, do they do less things? I think we can all agree that's probably true. The hypotheses are clearly stated, but their assumption that has not been studied ever before seems like a stretch. And the information did not flow easily from one page to the next. They repeated much of their information several times throughout the article. The dissemination of their findings was extremely complicated. It was not written for the layman or the average person, and I guess that's okay since it was studied in this very particular kinetic journal of aging. I found the study results to be difficult to understand. I mean, I'm staring at these graphs going, I don't understand these numbers. The terminology was super technical. I was told a long time ago, if you can say it in a simpler way, do so. Like, don't try to be fancy with your words. These researchers used highly technical kinetic industry jargon and algebra in the article, and it was really hard for me to I'm like, just tell me, net it out. And they never really did. I would say that their theory was substantiated in the study, but then it had been so at least 50 times by other researchers. They had many citations again at the end of their article, but they probably only cited a handful of them in the body of their paper. They certainly did not cite all those articles in their research paper. There were many limitations to this study that popped out to me as I was reading it. And in the limitations study of the article, the authors actually acknowledged most of them, which seems almost worse because they clearly knew that they weren't capturing a large group of people. I don't know. This whole study seemed unnecessary. It seems to be the case in most studies that the researchers set out to see if what they believe is true, and lo and behold, it's true. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, these studies. It's like they're not really studying it. It's like they're kind of shuffling the data to be more like how they think it should be, and that's how it ends up being. So yes, it turned out that people that had fallen had a fear of falling, and therefore their activity level decreased, which I think any intelligent person would kind of assume. I know that if I were afraid of falling, I would probably sit more. I'd probably become more immobile. I wouldn't take risks. I probably wouldn't shower as often, as most people wouldn't. The researchers never show us a list of what ADLs specifically they were studying or how each of them was related to the fear of falling. Like, do you find that you eat less, or do you find that you shower less, or get dressed less frequently, or wear the same clothes? They didn't do any of that. I have no idea what specifically ADLs they studied or how each ADL activity differed from based on the fear of falling. They used 3 scales to collect their data. They used what's called the UPDRS ADL scale and the Schwab and England Activities of Daily Living scale. And then they assessed the participants' physical activity by using the physical activity scale for the elderly called the PACE. I did look up the PACE form because I was going to give my dad the survey to see what his answers were. But so I don't know who comes up with these scales, but some of this stuff, my dad hasn't done in forever. And if this is a thing for the elderly, I don't know. Just the questions they were asking, like, have you gone skiing, snowboarding, running, jogging, hiking? No. I don't know that that's really a scale for the elderly. They did have in there, gardening, driving, which, makes sense. But some of the things were like, they're never going to score high on that. It's almost like it's a setup to fail from the start. As far as being experts in their field, it does appear that those 4 authors are experts in each of their fields, but they're 4 different fields. And again, it does seem like Bryant was the only person that contributed to this project. They provided relevant material, but they could have provided more. I honestly have more questions than answers after reading this study. The subject sample consisted of 83 people who had mild to moderate Parkinson's disease. All of the participants were able to ambulate and walk on their own, and they had no decline in cognitive status. So for me, it's like, why are we studying these folks? These folks are almost, fine. My dad, again, has had Parkinson's forever, and, he cannot walk unassisted. He hasn't walked alone in probably 15 years, and he has some dementia, which is pretty common with PD. And to study these people who have mild PD and they're able to walk around on their own, it just seems like that. Well, that's how many people does that include? I think that this study allows an adequate test of those who are in the early stages and are still walking on their own. This study did not take into account Parkinson's patients that are using mobility aids, such as walkers, canes, whatever, because if they were using walkers, that would probably reduce their fear of falling. So if we're studying Parkinson's patients' fears of falling, that would be a different result if somebody's using a mobility aid, because you probably have a less fear of falling if you're using the proper walker or mobility equipment. It also didn't include anybody with cognitive issues, which is extremely common in Parkinson's patients, so we don't know how that affects it. It also makes no mention of what, if any, medications or supplements the participants were taking. Were they taking carbidopa, levodopa? Were they taking any kind of supplements? Were they sprouting fava beans? What were they doing to maybe help themselves? Could that have had an impact on their assessments of their fear of falling? I know from my personal research that the vitamin D3 has been shown to reduce falls in the elderly. So obviously I have my dad on that. But, there's no mention of that. So that would have been nice to know. I would have liked to have seen more people in the study. I would also have liked them to not have discounted those that had more advanced Parkinson's or those with cognitive decline. In fact, I'd find more value in a study that showed the fear of falling in moderate to severe instead of mild to moderate patients. There's a lot of technical detail that could be replicated in this study, but I'm not sure that it should be. I think we can all safely assume that if you think you're going to fall, you are probably more cautious with what activities you're going to participate in. The results that were there did have a correlation between fall frequency and disease severity, motor impairment, fatigue, the ability to perform ADL tasks, and their level of fear of falling. I think we can all agree that anyone who falls frequently might have a fear of falling. The major difference I saw from the data that I could figure out in this study was that those who had never fallen reported a higher fear of falling, whereas those who had a couple of falls or more than a couple of falls had less of a fear of falling again, and those two groups had the same fear of falling again. So I found that interesting. It was almost like the fear of the unknown. If you had never fallen, maybe you'd heard stories about people falling and breaking something and dying, or who knows, or never be able to get up. So I did find it interesting that those who had never fallen reported the highest fear of falling. That was about all that I found interesting in this article. I would have liked to have seen how the various ADLs were varied based on their fear of falling, and also, again, with the medication. That was I would like to have known that. They gathered a lot of data, they analyzed a lot of data, but the data that they gathered was not a very deep dive, and it was very broad in nature. In their conclusion, the authors state that the only implication of the results is that the fear of falling should be routinely evaluated due to its association of limiting activities. So what are they saying? They're saying that doctors and other caregivers should assess frequently a patient's fear of falling because it affects their activity. But the authors then do not state what should be done with those evaluation results, and they don't suggest any solutions on how to prevent the fear of falling or how to prevent falls or any future help. They just say, hey, if you have a fear of falling, you might slow down. Again, they set out to prove their theory, and their data matches their theory. The authors provide no directions for the future, nor do they suggest how to help these folks who have a fear of falling. There are no errors in their facts, but their content was so surface in nature, I don't think we can learn much from this study. Perhaps if they included ways to help those with Parkinson's disease overcome their fear of falling, the study would have been more valuable. So again, I feel I'd love to give a great report to a great study, but it seems like I'm 2 for 2 in ripping them apart. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this dissemination of this very technical article. I'll be posting the citation if you want to try to read it for yourself. It's an extremely hard read, but it's a subject that's of interest to me. But unfortunately, I didn't glean much from this other than that people who have never fallen have a greater fear of falling. All right, well, have a great day. Bye.